Welcome, everybody. This is Reality Shift, a show for entrepreneurs, investors, and founders, innovators that are looking to succeed in this XR space, spatial computing, however you call it, what you want to call it. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli. I'm head of marketing and community at Shapes XR, and I'm here with my co-host Anand Das. Hi, Anand. Nice to see you.
Hey, hello everybody.
So let's do this. Why don't we start maybe with a little bit of introduction, so you can introduce also yourself, and maybe you can say about why we are here, why we are doing actually reality shift, what is actually shifting.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hi, my name is Anand. I work on virtual reality and mixed reality applications with the developer ecosystem on MetaQuest. I look at things like the future of fitness and wellness and education and productivity and collaboration using VR and MR. Um, I've always been fascinated by the evolution of computing, and we're starting to see the next wave of computing emerging. And at least from my perspective, the goal of getting together with Gabrielle is to look at the space dispassionately, understand the history because patterns repeat itself,
Yeah.
and through this process, understand what actually are lessons from the past which will carry forward and what actually changes. And so, really excited to do this together with Gabrielle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's great. And I think this is just kind of like the beginning of a journey. Now we're going to discuss about how things kind of like started. We're going to look a bit at the past. And I think what is also interesting is that we're going to look at how we can learn from the past, but also how we can use that learnings in order to address the future, because those are the things that we want to discuss really today. So stay with us. What we're going to do is that we're going to look at some of the things that happened in the past in terms of hype, and that's why we decided to call these episodes looking through the hype. So how can you demystify, how can you not be, let's say, deceived or lured by all this noise sometimes. So we're going to look at that. Then we're going to look at what is actually a hype, when there is truth and maybe technological advancement behind this hype. And then at the end, what we would like to do is give you some tools that we are trying to put together to see, okay, what can I do with this? How can I make better informed decision in order to maybe leverage an opportunity or take less risk or whatever that might be, but still not fall prey of the hype, and then make your own decision to help you succeed in this spatial computing space. So we discussed about hype, but maybe let's first, right? What is hype, Anand? I mean, how have we defined it? And then maybe you're going to chip in with some other ideas. But I think you had a pretty good impression or definition of what that is.
Yeah. The reason why we're starting this episode or the series with hype is we should start at the beginning of any phenomenon to understand how it's progressed through time. And it is really interesting because I saw DK1, DK2, Rift, Quest. And as I started looking at the space, it became obvious that there's a lot of stuff that's happened before it when it came to virtual reality and mixed reality. And every time something new happens, the marketplace, whether it's investors or founders, the hype cycle kicks in. And hype is nothing new. It's always been there, and it's not just a technology thing, right? If you remember the Dutch tulip bulb mania of the 15th century to the dot-com IT stock frenzy of the 90s, and even Gartner has a name for this, right? It's hype cycle, and it's just a phenomenon that occurs quite repeatedly when new things come. So it's usually driven by some sort of like scarcity or an external influence, either through influencers or people in power, sometimes peer pressure, friends and family, and often novelty factors. So when you put all these things together, you get into this place where participants in a market get really excited about something, and it usually leads to inflated expectations before people get disillusioned. And I think
Yeah,
this hype
and
cycle.
I just wanted to add one thing, because there's some things we think about hype as something that is bad, that is exclusively bad, and I don't think that this is really necessarily the framing that we want to give, right? So when we think about, oh, it's like inflated expectation or friends and family peer pressure, it always feels like being manipulated. So I would say that hype is a phenomenon, and within it there are always like opportunities to be taken and so on. So I wouldn't want to necessarily to start this conversation saying, oh, don't fall prey to the hype, everything is bad. No, let's just look at it, right? Let's just make a proper evaluation of it, right?
I think you're right. Like, you're spot on. Like, hype happens for a reason. I think we should probably replace the word hype with like exuberance or enthusiasm. I think
excitement.
Excitement, right? It's good. Like, I mean, what is worse than hype? Like, nobody caring about anything, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And so, like, exuberance and excitement is really good. And I think Peter Thiel talks about this, right? What is a secret that you know that others don't know? And therein lies the opportunity. And as you're looking at these exciting spaces, whether it's XR, spatial computing, AI, whatever, the trick is to cut through the mystery and get to like what is truly valuable and how can you as a founder build successful long-term businesses through the space. So you're right. It's more excitement, I guess, than anything else.
No, but then so if we look at hype, right? And now we don't want to necessarily go through and look down at the analysis of the Gartner hype cycles, where you say, okay, there is this bump, and then there is the drought of disillusionment, and so what we want to see is like, how does that actually, if we look at XR, right? So would you say that we are in this like one big hype cycle since the first Oculus was announced, the Kickstarter launched, or are there multiple hype cycles? I mean, how would you actually define that? Where are we right now?
Okay, since you said that this is more about excitement and exuberance, I think I'm going to call bankruptcy on the word hype, and let's talk about all the exciting moments that has happened. The reality, as I've looked through
I like it.
Cool. The reality as I looked through the space was people have been working on virtual reality and head-mounted displays since the 1930s. So this thing has been in development for, at this point, what, 70 odd years. And as I kind of like looked at the space, back in 1962, there was an invention called the Sensorama. It was invented by somebody called Martin, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Heilig, where you could put your head into like a box-like thing, and it would show films, and it was designed to provide an immersive virtual experience. And that was sort of the first recorded history of like
Sensorama. You said Sensorama.
Yeah.
Okay, but it had other senses beyond sight. So there was something like, was it like a 4D experience, or was it just video? How was it?
I think it was more like stereoscopic display of films. Okay. The second thing, I think that second moment really was when Douglas Engelbart invented computer-generated graphics. And this is where computers intersect with virtual reality, right? Because the first time you could design experiences that only existed virtually inside the computer. Then what happened around the late 1960s is Ivan Sutherland at the University of Utah created what was called the first virtual reality head-mounted display. People called it the Sword of Damocles because it was sort of hanging around your head, and you would step in. It was not very immersive. You could only see a small volume. You couldn't move around, so it was not really like sixed off. It was kind of glowing lines in space, but it was truly when, for the first time, somebody saw the advancement of technology that looked like what is VR today, right? And then after that, as always with the progress of technology, there is some form of military support and intervention. So this notion of virtual reality got used for flight simulation for post-World War II pilots. It was used by NASA as a training simulator for astronauts. So the technology slowly progressed where simulations became a thing that bled out from this sort of core technology invention to associated fields. And then the first time commercial products got launched was in the 90s. And I think that's when the term virtual reality got coined. Jaron Lanier, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. They started a company called VPL Research, which sold the first ever virtual reality products. And then as technology progressed out of the labs, more commercialization started, and all of this is before Oculus bursting on the scene, right? So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but maybe a question: would you say that this sounds like a lot, to some extent, technological advancement? Would you say that are these like would you say that this is also a hype or an excitement as you defined it, or is that a technological advancement? I mean, when is that one? Can Are they equally interchangeable, or there is a threshold for something to get hype? Is that when it reaches the market? I mean, how would you say that?
Since my point of view is technology progress happens in small parts and bits and pieces. And at every point in time, humans look at that from the outside and they see something new. And then there's exuberance and excitement, right? The important lesson that I learned looking at this is it's never that there's like a 0 to 1 moment where something suddenly flips and it becomes viable. Progress ultimately is an accumulation of small steps. And what we're seeing today as XR and spatial computing is that 70 years of engineering work and lab work and physics and chemistry and software slowly accumulating to a point where commercial products are becoming really, really viable. And human memory is really short, right? Like I wasn't there when the Sword of Damocles was invented. And so when I look at Quest and I look at Rift and DK1, I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. But turns out that it was possible through another 60, 70 years of slow research building up. And I think this is generally how technology progresses. So you have to disassociate the underlying technical progress and then the observation of the said progress by people from the outside.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point. We should be mindful of what are these technological advancements and what kind of impact do they then have on what is the industry, right? And that is one of the things that I think we're going to shortly discuss. But the point is, like, what I was also thinking, do you feel like this series, so it feels like there is always a chase for more and for better, right? So in terms of there is more processing power, then maybe it's 6 degrees of freedom, then we are wireless, then we are pancake lenses. And I mean, it feels like are we always kind of like chasing a technological, let's say, chasing a ever moving target? Is that where we currently are? I mean, are we ever going to reach it?
Now we're getting into philosophical conversation. I think progress stems from dissatisfaction from status quo, right? If you believe what you have is like done and perfect, you're never going to push it. And I think technology.
Yes. So basically,
progress,
what you're saying, yes. So basically, what you're saying is that enough for a certain individual, and that is kind of like how do I say that? That is kind of like it's not going to be enough for everybody, but for someone at a certain technological level and advance might be as well enough.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like, are you aware, by the way, of like we talked a lot about like the foundational technologies that continue to be built like from the 1930s. I don't know if you've looked at this, Gabriel. Have you looked at like the first commercial versions of VR that I think it started with Sega in '93?
Yeah, it was the Virtual Boy, right? This red
Yeah,
thing.
Nintendo launched the Virtual Boy after that in 1995. It was the
Okay.
first mass-produced, I guess, virtual reality game system. I think they sold about 700,000 systems. It was not considered
That is
a
actually,
success.
it's not bad. It's
not
not bad
bad.
still, right? I mean, if you, I was reading the other day, the Magic Leap sold, I don't know how many units, like, but certainly less than that. That is for sure.
Yeah, in 1995, selling 700,000 or 800,000 units of a mass-produced VR system, pretty impressive, right?
Right. Yeah. So it's all a matter of perspective.
It's a matter of perspective, and I think you have to track two things, right? Evolution of core foundational technologies, which we talked about, and the commercialization of those technologies and the products that consumers will want, crave, and spend money on because they believe it's valuable enough for them. It's not for everybody, right? And so, and it's always not, and it's not just always hardware. I mean, Nintendo was a hardware and a software play, but software equally evolved alongside this evolution of hardware from a commercial perspective. Do you remember Second Life, Linden Labs, 2002,
Of course.
3?
Yes. Yes.
Right,
yes.
that happened. And then Kinect from Xbox, you remember that back in 2010, where you could move in your room and it would track it and you could have experiences inside. That happened around the time when that was happening. Google Glasses happened. I remember being in Moscone Stadium when skydivers jumped from an airplane over San Francisco wearing Google Glasses, and they landed in the roof of Moscone Center. And Sergey Brin was on the stage, and they rode on a bicycle in between the audiences and reached the stage, all while live streaming Google Glass. I think that what like excited people in the valley of like what virtual. It wasn't really virtual reality; it was more like augmented reality, I guess. That was there. Yeah, and that's when like Oculus and the around about that time, Oculus the Kickstarter project started, right? So there's a history of things happening as commercial products before Oculus.
Okay, and I think it does make sense, and we are gonna see more of this. So this is the point. Was like, whenever this happens, right? How do you kind of like react? Right. So let's say that you are somehow involved in the industry. I don't know, maybe you are, let's say, in a big corporation, and there is this drive to adopt new technologies, and this like sometimes also a FOMO also from this corporation that is like they're always afraid of missing out for some way. Sometimes you are just an entrepreneur, or maybe like someone with the skill necessary that will be able to succeed in that world. So if you are these and you see this happening around you to some extent, how would you actually, react and behave?
Interesting question. I think it's mostly an emotional game, right? How do you manage your emotions as you look at phenomenon happening and be dispassionate about it? I mean, this is part of the reason why we're doing this series of conversations, right? Which is dispassionately look at a space and understand what's truly going on, so that we can understand the underlying phenomenon of whatever is happening. So I would say, like, step one, as you look through anything new, whether it's this or generative AI, or there was this craze about crypto and Web3 like just a few months ago, right?
There is. And it's coming again. And it's coming again. Let's be honest, right? Let's not say, oh, yeah, it's dead. Come on. We all know that these things come and go. And within each one, there is always an opportunity to be had.
They come in cycles, right? Like, and there's like sometimes just like step functions happen. Like the thing that Oculus and Quest did incredibly well, I thought, was to bring this mainstream enough for the consumers to care. And right, Rift was incredible. Then came the standalone Quest device 1 and 2. And then came Quest Pro, which had more mixed reality than virtual reality. I think the step functions that happen, and recently Apple talked about Apple Vision Pro, right? And so these key pivotal moments will continue to happen as technology progresses. And every time as consumers or as students of a segment or an industry, when we look at it, when we see these step functions happening, excitement comes along with it. And at that moment,
there was just one thing. So sorry, Nan, because I want to interrupt before you move too far ahead. There was one thing that they come in cycle. That's one of the things that you said, and I think very often people try to simplify what is a technology evolving in time on one line, on one temporal line, and instead it's like a step. And that is why whenever I see that line that goes up and goes down, and for some extent, in some magical way, you are always at the bottom where things are going to get better. That's how people always portray this. But I think instead that we are like in a series of oscillations that go up and down, and sometimes that is driven, I don't know, by indeed advancement in technology. So or maybe like another player joining, and we know what we are talking about in that sense, and or maybe a player leaving. Right, because let's be honest, also Google like turning their back had also an impact, and now coming back seems like. So I think that we shouldn't simplify. Sadly, I don't think we can oversimplify this and say, oh yeah, we are here, we can go up, we can go down. But no, probably the situation is more complex. There are going to be more and more of this oscillation, and finding out what direction to take or during each one. That's one of the things that is going to be tricky.
I'm really glad you brought this up, Gabriel, because anybody who's worked with data and used data to like understand patterns, you'll notice that it really depends on how zoomed in to the graph you are and zoomed out to the graph you are. If you look at the data on a daily basis, full of noise, right?
Yeah.
Weekly, slightly more smooth. Monthly, yearly, even more smooth, right? And so what I think tends to happen, and I heard this first best described when Felix Hartman, who runs Hartman Capital, was talking about this. Like if you zoom out to the chart of progress, there is macro cycles, right? Generally, things tend up into the right over a long enough time frame as progress is being made. But in each moment, you are in microcycles. And microcycles have ups and downs and ups and downs. And what looks like cyclical fluctuations is a microcycle wrapping up and it emerges into another microcycle, and they stack on top of themselves as they progress.
No, absolutely, and I think this is the kind of thing that we are trying to address also right now, right? So we are not talking necessarily about the whole 50, 60, 100 years almost, right? By this point, as you were mentioning, we are looking at something that is more in the scale of, hey, when we 3 years, right? What's going to happen in this time frame? And by the way, sorry, I interrupt. So I want to get the ball back to you because you were mentioning about kind of like managing the emotional gain, right? What were you referring about specifically?
What I was trying to get at is like having been a student of building technology companies now for about 10, 12 years, having built a couple of companies before as well. When looking at technology progress from the outside, I think it's really important. And as a founder, the number one thing that I learned was to manage the emotional ups and downs of trying to build something that changes the world. The number one enemy that I found of this is the mental state. Have you heard of the mimetic theory?
Actually not.
So, okay, so there's a brilliant book by Luke, I think his last name is pronounced Burgess. It's called Wanting. We should put it in the show notes. What mimetic theory says is everyone copies everyone's desire. And that's how kind of humans learn, by imitation. And when someone wants something, we naturally want it too. And with enough time, the desires converge where everyone wants the same thing. As a result, people enter into competition with each other, as opposed to like think about what they can uniquely focus on that will help them win and persist and grow over the long term. And so that is what I was referring to of managing the emotional state. You should look at multiple data sources before you fall prey to this mimetic behavior, I guess. And you should get opinions from all sides of the table before you are able to get to the core of what it is, right? Check multiple sources, check underlying motives, whether the source of the information, the person or the company have an underlying motive that is providing information, and look at what is driving success and profitability if you're trying to build a business on top of these technology things. What's more important? And identify the critical choke points, whether it's on the supply side or the demand side, to build a successful product.
But maybe, Anand, are you done, or there are some other elements? Because
I'll say one thing. After you look at this, right, the important thing to look at is like, what assets do you have that you can compete and you can successfully win with? And I think is a process you go through to kind of go beyond the surface level exuberance and into the underlying progress of technology that you want to build something on top of. So yeah.
And so, for example, like, I mean, how would this potentially apply to XR? I mean, you mentioned, for example, about look at underlying motives. Would that be something that maybe can help us understand, and by making an example to something that is related to spatial computing?
Let's break this into two parts: macro and micro, right? If we look at XR as a space today, I still think it's very much a nascent space that has tremendous potential to grow. And are there enough consumers? And has it broken mainstream? Not yet. Are there enough platforms pushing it forward? It's starting to emerge, right? On like the basis of the Quest success, now we're seeing Apple Vision Pro. There's news about Google building its own headset. HTC and Vive are already in there. So I think the platform and the device manufacturers are trying to increase the availability of these devices so that, and that's the supply side, right? And then you have the consumers who are slowly starting to get excited. I think from a gaming perspective, people have really like latched onto the fact that immersive gaming is the future of gaming in some sense. You're seeing it in 2D with Roblox and Fortnite, and now it's becoming like VR based. So I would say like the industry is fairly in its early phases. The biggest piece that I when I look at the industry is like what I call is like, what is a substitute and what is a choice, right? Like you can be doing something in your real world on your computer, on your phone, or you could be doing it in XR. And I think the consumer behavior of understanding why something needs to be done in XR versus not is very much is in its early phases. So I think in pockets you're starting to see consumer demand emerge. In pockets you're starting to see consumer behavior starting to change. New players are coming in. So as a founder, it's a really interesting time to start looking at XR and the opportunities to build companies. But you have to be very measured in how you look at what you want to build and time it, than simply jump in because XR became hot, right?
Right. And even though I have to say that you're kind of like already jumping down to conclusion, or say like, oh yeah, do it. There are opportunities, but be careful. I mean, is that the way you would kind of like summarize the situation? So how would you still frame it when looking at what is coming next, right? How would someone maybe take a more informed decision? Because just for me, for example, right? So when I look at even the simplest thing that we can say, and it's resonate with what you were saying, like check different data points, right? And I see this as at the most basic level, like look, don't stop at the thumbnail of an article. Don't stop at the thumbnail of a YouTube video. Please go there, take the time to actually read it. Another example, something that I also find very valuable, is actually Reddit. And not because the posts do not fall prey to the hype or the click, but because the comments that are in Reddit sections tends to be something, a bit of a conversation that somehow resonate with what communities think. So I still find them kind of like, especially like the virtual reality Reddit, the Quest Reddit, I find them still like full of people that like the industry and have likely been there for years. So in that sense, I think that one, like the simplest and even mundane advice would be really to look at the simplest, look at beyond the thumbnail, read and make your own opinion based on what you are actually based on what you're reading, basically on information you are gathering. Then yeah, sorry, Anand, you want to say something?
I was going to say you're touching on something really important on how to build intuition and how to build your own point of view as you look at exciting spaces. And by the way, this conversation will sound exactly the same if you do it for AI, if you do it for Web3.
Exactly, absolutely. Exactly I agree. Right? I agree.
Yeah,
I know, totally.
XR, but though they'll have their own individual flavors, right? What you talked about just reminded me of two things. One, and this is kind of like most people know about this, which is the future is already here, but it's not evenly distributed. Not everybody can see it. Not everybody has access to it. So if you're trying to invest or if you're trying to build, try to live in that future. And what that means is buy XR devices, buy that games, buy the apps, use it to see how the interaction goes, right?
And this is one thing, man. And this is one thing that blows my mind. You need to live it. You really need to live it to understand it. And this is one thing that if you are coming here and you are listening, please, please, if there is one thing maybe to take on from this show is just this, because I've seen people that, for example, maybe build VR trainings and they haven't tried other trainings that are on the market. That maybe they complain about virtual worlds, but have you ever been in Horizon? Have you ever been in Roblox? Have you ever been in these other spaces? Have you wore a headset for more than 5 minutes? And maybe some of these people, the first thing that, and the only thing that they wore was a Google Cardboard. And I'm like, we have moved past that, right? So this is one thing that I beg everybody. Yes, Anna, please.
Sorry, can I go on a rant for a little bit?
Go rant.
The problem with hype cycles is exactly this. A bunch of tourists show up, a bunch of talking heads show up, they have opinions about things, and without going deeper and living the experience. And I think net, these kind of things are very, very dangerous for the long-term progress when you have these opinionated tourists showing up and they jump to the next hype, whether it's in XR or AI or Web3, they jump to the next thing. What ends up happening is they inflate expectations so much, or they deflate expectations. It could be the other way too. That is actually hurtful for like founders who are what we call as like cockroach founders, right? People who've been at this for 6, 7, 8 years, building slowly but surely, because this kind of behavior causes volatility for them. Investors get excited, things get deflated,
and the day after,
they don't, like, fundraising becomes hard, like getting engineers becomes hard. So like the rant from my perspective is like, the technologists and the engineers and the product folks and the founders slowly building incremental progress. I find it really hard when opinionated tourists come, show up, create a bunch of chaos, and then just disappear. So like, I think the two things are really like, go live in the product, like you said, Gabriel. Second is go live in the communities, right? Because anything that becomes really big starts off as a toy. And toys are loved by niche communities. You talked about subreddits. Look at the conversations happening there. Go live in the Discord channels. Look at the conversations happening there. Because the classic disruptor, early adopter, innovator, late majority, you will see pockets of innovators, consumers, living in those communities and talking about what they found exciting. So
and not even true, not even just consumer we are talking about, because those are the people that live, the creators, right? The nerds that have been there for a while. You will also find those, and those are also very important. It's not just the person that is using, and maybe it's like, okay, it's been a gamer or someone. I think that is also like that to consider. So the creators.
I consider them consumers, right? I consider them super early consumers, because they've seen something and they're okay with it not being perfect, but they realize that it's already better than something that they currently have, and they're excited about it, right? And those power users or creators will give us the pathway as founders to like build for just those folks and incrementally build it, ignoring the hype.
Yeah, and there is also one thing you said. You mentioned like better than what they have, right? That attract them because they found in this technology something better. Sometimes I would say that it's not even just about being something better, maybe offering something different or offering an opportunity, because that is one of the things that I believe this technology only really offer is the ability to experience, is the ability to create, is the ability to connect in ways that maybe a screen doesn't. Right. So I think that is also another point. So as Anand said, actually, don't be a tourist. Okay, don't be a tourist. If you are here, just like be here for like thoughtfully, right? Be here and immerse yourself. I mean, I don't want to repeat myself. I think you already have said it all, right?
Yeah. Building something that people want is really, really hard. And it's always good to ride the wave. And as founders, I think, who see the future, we want to try and time that wave as best as possible. And same for like investors who are thoughtful. And my hope is as people start looking at XR, I mean, the hype cycle kicked into gear a little bit more this year, right? With new devices coming to the market.
Of course.
It's really good that there's excited investors. My request would be, instead of writing articles about spatial computing in the future, place bets where your convictions are. Fund companies, fund founders who've been working on it for the last 6, 7, 8 years. And if you're a founder not in XR and want to get into XR because it looks like the next big thing, live it, get your headsets, build thoughtfully, carefully, live in the communities, and see what the real stuff that matters is, and build those things and be ready to build for the long term.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is kind of like summarize like very much what's next, right? So today we have discussed in a nutshell some of the things that we were happened in the past. Let's not be deceived. Let's not surrender to your to the FOMO, to your peers, maybe to what the media said, but instead get there, experience, get immersed, and that is really the way that you can make a better decision, whether it's finding your own startup or investing in one, or maybe try deciding to adopt a technology for your own organization, right? Because there are also many of those that are looking for ways in which these technologies can actually make a difference, right? So Anand, I think we can wrap up this for now, and I suppose that we are gonna get everybody next time for the next episodes of Reality Shift to then discuss about how did the hype went, or excitement. Sorry, we decided to give it a new name. How did this excitement, did that really turn out what we were expecting? So Anand, thank you very much for being here.
Love it. This is great. Let's do more.
Awesome. Absolutely. So stay with us and see you next time at Reality Shift. Bye, guys.